they were very grateful for a big crop because they needed to fill their bins back up, so that they had wheat to offer.
Hi, once again, everybody. Welcome back to the Comstock channel. I'm Marlin Bohling with you. Glad to have you with us. We're going to be recapping some things that took place this week. It'll be of keen interest, especially to the wheat producers. I want to remind you to like these videos and subscribe to the videos by clicking on the bell icon and share these videos with others as well. Well, it's my pleasure to be able to talk with Dave Green, and he's the Executive Vice President of the Wheat Quality Council, who just returned from the Spring Wheat Tour and Durum Wheat Tour that took place in the Northern Plains. And congratulations on another one under the belt there, Dave. Good to have you
Thank you.
back with us. Hopefully you're getting a little rest. Tell me about the tour. Everything that I heard coming out of it this year indicated a pretty good crop.
And it was pretty well known going in. This was not a surprise, I don't think, to anybody. The uh, the the conditions throughout the spring, winter, and spring were above average moisture levels for North Dakota and western Minnesota and South Dakota. So they had rain early in the spring. They got most of the crop in at early, and then there were some severe rains. And there's a little bit of a delay with some of the crop that the fields didn't get planted with the others. But for the most part, they fought surplus moisture more than they fought dryness, and uh, that showed with the crop. They also haven't had a lot of hot weather, so all of those states, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. I think North Dakota, they were saying they had not had a 90-degree day probably until today. I think it's getting hot up there today. But so they've had good temperatures, plentiful moisture, and that has led to good wheat stands. And so it was well known that most of the crop was rated good to excellent, and I think our tour saw that for sure. As far as I was concerned, I don't remember seeing that good of potential in every part of the state. Usually, there are vast areas that didn't get rain, or some areas that didn't get rain and or couldn't get planted, and that really wasn't the case this year. It was in pretty good shape. Consequently, things turned to much more of a disease concern, and so we got high yields and confirmed that for the group, but we were spent most of our time looking at leaves and looking for scab, which would be the big disease that everybody worries about up there. And so most of our time was spent looking for other things besides yield potential.
Now, from what I understood, it sounded like you did find some scab damage or infestation, but it was more on the eastern part. Is that
It
correct?
is it is in the east, and um, the other thing that you got to put into this when we start talking about scab in particular is you can't see the damage until the wheat starts to turn. So when the wheat starts to turn color, that's when these heads die early and get the pink mold on them, and so you can kind of see. It's much easier to pop out to your eye when you see the heads that have discoloration. The northern areas weren't far enough along to see the scab damage. Now it was in the west, so when we ran out from the east, that southeast, central, east central area had quite a bit of scab damage. As we moved to the center of the state and west, we saw less scab damage, and that made everybody feel better. The northern half of the region, you just couldn't see the scab yet, if there was some. So it's going to be another week or two before you can definitively say it doesn't seem to be a problem or that it's isolated in the east. But they were spraying. Everybody sprays up there now, fungicide to control that, and you could see the tracks in the fields as we were going through. So I think everybody was aware that this was a possibility, and I think the growers are doing what they can to put a stop to it.
Earlier this year, of course, you had the hard red winter wheat tour. That was a totally different scenario. That was a lot more uneven crop in the central and southern plains there. Some good areas, some were really terrible. So this seemed to be a lot more consistent. But in this case, you're not looking at just, for example, in the spring, you look at hard red wheat. Now, this particular tour, you're looking at several different classes of wheat. You might explain what it is that you were surveying and give us the overall results that you came up with as per class, if you can break it out that way.
The winter wheat that's grown in the U.S. Again, I'll start with the premise that most farmers in the world would rather plant winter wheat than spring wheat. It's in the ground longer. It tends to yield better. Um, it would be a preferable crop that they would plant. Once you get out of the southern tier of counties in North Dakota, winter wheat gets scarce because the winters are so cold it actually will kill the plant. You'll kill it during the winter. So farmers are kind of forced, I guess, to grow spring wheat in those areas because of this temperature problem. But up there, in addition to a lot of other crops, there's a lot of crop diversity, but they do grow two other classes of wheat. So we do see fields of hard red winter up there, and but the primary wheat crop up there is hard red spring, and then there's a hard or a Durum wheat, which is a hard white yellow spring. Um, the durum is used for pasta, and it's valued for the color. I tell people most of the time the color in lasagna, pasta noodles, that's a natural color that comes from the wheat itself. The hard red spring wheat has turned into a premium wheat. It tends to be higher protein. It tends to be a better quality. So we export a lot of hard red spring wheat. We compete with Canada for the hard red spring market, and that wheat's market is primarily as a blending wheat for other countries, where their hard red winter that they have access to tends to be a little lower in protein, not as strong. So most of the world uses hard red spring wheat from the US or Canada to strengthen their blend, to strengthen their grist. So hard red spring wheat in western Minnesota, North Dakota, and Montana, excuse me, are very highly valued. They tend to be at a premium. They tend to be higher protein, and so there's a greater interest, I think, with the export market in what we see, what the potential of the crop is. And for them, what I think is going to be interesting this year is whether with these kind of yields we can maintain a decent protein level. Um, North Dakota Springs market is in there's for 14s and 15 protein, and in high yielding record crop years in the past, they haven't been that high in protein, so it makes the high protein even more expensive as people look to it for a demand. So I'm you know, farmers tend to be real good about knowing what the potential of the crop is and how much fertilizer they should put on. But I'm not so sure they anticipated this good of yields this year. So there is a concern for low protein up there, and it'll be felt if it is a low protein crop. That'll make the high proteins a distinct premium.
Let's take a look at these classes here.
All right.
First of all, on the spring wheat, what did you find for the
Sure.
average yield?
So for our trip, I think I've told you what we I try to get people trained. I've tried to get people to all look at wheat the same. So we give everybody a yield formula and we train on it the first night. And we put four people in a car. We drive different routes, so we're not going out in a bus and making stops. We're spreading out and making stops. We tell them all to make 10 to 12 stops during the day and actually do the counts in the field. And so the numbers I'm going to give you these averages. So
Okay.
for for the hard red spring, we stopped at 237 wheat fields, and our average was 54 and a half bushels an acre. So compared to last year, our average was 47.4. So we're what would that be? 7 bushels an acre higher than we were last year for the area. And our data goes back on this page. Our data goes back to 1997. Um, but from 2009 on, that's all we can fit across the page. We don't have anything approaching that kind of a yield number. So this was our highest yield by far. And the government had come out with an early estimate this month at 56, I think they predicted for North Dakota. And again, for our tour, 54 and a half, that's about the same number. So I think we agreed with the government that it looks like a record crop for up there. For the Durum, we had the 18 fields. Again, they don't grow the Durum on our routes like they used to. That business has moved further west, so we don't get we used to have almost as many Durum fields as we did spring. Now that acreage has moved west, and we just don't get the coverage out there that we would like. But we had 18 Durum fields, and that averaged 45.3. Durum tends to average less than per acre yield wise than spring wheat. Uh, because it's just the breeding process it's more of a specialty crop, and they just don't get the yield out of it that they do out of spring wheat. Consequently, they get paid more for it usually. So there's a lot of Durum farmers that like getting a little more for their wheat than the spring wheat guys do. So that was our deal. A few people stopped at winter wheat, and you could see it out there because it's ripe. So the wheat harvest for winter wheat is going to start pretty quickly. And again, we had 2 fields, and they were in the 50s. So it's a pretty good. The winter wheat looks good also up there.
Now, looking again at that Durham number that you just gave, how does that compare to a year ago?
To a year ago for the Durum, it was 43.9. So just a couple bushels better than last year on the route. So
Okay.
the conditions are good. There's no getting around that. Rain helps a lot. Cool temperatures help a lot. The kernels are filling in the heads. A lot of third kernels and fourth kernels in some of the fields. So it's you couldn't, up until today, you probably couldn't have picked any better or any better weather situation for this year's crop.
Now, Dave, I'm curious. Did you hear from many people further north, let's say from Canada? I keep hearing all these stories that there is so much drought, and of course, we're hearing about the wildfires now in Western Canada. But things like oats and spring wheat and canola really suffered up there. Did you see any evidence of that in the western part of where you were on your tour?
I did not hear any reports from people there. Um, I think when you're in North Dakota, they tend to want to ignore Canada. They don't talk much about Canada. They talk about their own stuff. But we would have went as far north as well west and north of, or let's say north of Williston, which is way up there and into the corner, and that would be right tangent to the Saskatchewan area that would be the big spring wheat area, and in those areas of North Dakota, they're not suffering from dryness, and they're not in Montana either. So I didn't even know that about Canada was struggling that much with dryness.
Well, it just makes you wonder. Earlier there had been some concern about some areas up there, so it's not the same universally. Of course, you and I both know they've had some issues with Russian wheat production this year, Ukrainian wheat production. They've had some crop issues, drought conditions in that part of the country, or in that part of the globe, rather. But it sounds like overall, the U.S. finally had a decent year when you look at the whole thing as a conglomerate from the southern plains all the way to the northern plains. It's nice to at least have something to sell, right?
That's right. Or what I hear is not just more to sell. We've replenished. We've filled back up our grain bins. So I think there's been enough this year. When I talk to some of the grain companies that I still am in contact with in the winter wheat areas, they were very grateful for a big crop because they needed to fill their bins back up, so that they had wheat to offer to the export market. So, coming off a couple bad crops in the winter wheat area, having a little more wheat to refill your stocks so that you could offer exports again was important. So yes, I think it looks like we're going to have wheat to sell for sure.
Other than the wheat, I know you were focused on, calculating wheat yields and that sort of thing, but did anything else catch your attention while you were on that tour up there? Anything about the other crops or just agriculture in general up in that
Yeah,
part?
so what's happening up there over time is that the Red River Valley, for example, is the big flat high production area up there. When I started looking at crops, it was a small grain field all the way to into Canada. It was barley, oats, and spring wheat in that Red River Valley. Uh, Now it's seldom do you see a wheat field. It's all corn and soybeans. And as you move out into the state, they have dryland. They grow dryland corn now north and west of Minot, which is unheard of in my time. That there could be corn and beans growing that far north. The genetics are good. For the genetics have improved for corn and soybeans. They've got the growing season down now to grow in those areas. And there is that demand for soybean oil. So there's soybean plants, biodiesel plants getting built and already running up there. So you see more of the oil seeds area. I was stunned at how much canola was planted, for example, up there. Um, and canola, it turns out, does real well with the extra water. So it's a plant that thrives on these surplus water situations. So, perhaps they all saw this coming, but the canola is very thick and it's everywhere up there. There's an awful lot of it, and it's growing real well too. So, we North Dakota wheat production is still their biggest acreage by far, but the corn and soybeans oil seeds are creeping up and taking more and more of that acreage over time. Like wheat has that problem everywhere. Wheat has that problem everywhere. I mean, it's it's uh, it's not as in demand, and U.S. farmers have to grow what's the best value on their land because it's expensive land, and wheat has not been giving them the return that some of these other crops are.
Well, let's recap these numbers then for everybody this year. The overall average, a lot of people are hearing um, the all wheat yield, I'll put that in air quotes, all
Okay.
wheat yield was 53.8 bushels per acre. The spring wheat yield came out to 54.5. I think that's kind of the key focus that you were looking at there.
Yeah.
And then the Durum yield, 45.3 bushels per acre. But it's a weighted average to come up with that all wheat number that everybody hears about, right?
Yeah, it's we just put all the fields together, but again, that it's a it's turned into a spring wheat tour by default because that we just don't see the Durham up on the routes that we have. And every year we have to talk it through and say, can we go further west? And it's just too difficult to get cars out that far on the system that we have set up. So we'll just continue to talk about going more into the Durham areas, but there's no getting around the fact that the Durham is running away from us on our coverage. So
Well, thanks again for the time. Congratulations on another successful wheat tour and rest up. You're probably going to need it.
all righty.
That's Dave Green, Executive Vice President, with us from the Wheat Quality Council. And that's a look at our spring wheat and Durham wheat tour for 2024. That'll do it for this episode. For producer Brianne Hendrickson, I'm Marlin Bohling. We'll catch you next time right here on the Comstock channel. Thanks for joining us on our Comstock YouTube channel. Don't forget you can also find us on Facebook and TikTok as well. Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and or options is substantial, and each investor and or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.